legality of proposed detainee interrogation techniques before they were approved by former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Carl Levin of Michigan chairs the Armed Services Committee, and we'll look in on this as the meeting is about to begin.
Good morning, everybody. Today's hearing will focus on the origins of aggressive interrogation techniques used against detainees in U.S. custody. We have three panels of witnesses today, and I want to thank them for their willingness to voluntarily appear before the committee. Intelligence saves lives. Knowing where an insurgent has buried an IED can keep a vehicle carrying Marines in Iraq from being blown up. Knowing that an al-Qaeda associate visited an internet cafe in Kabul could be the key piece of information that unravels a terrorist plot targeting our embassy. But how do we get people who know the information to share it with us? Does degrading them or treating them harshly increase the chances that they'll be willing to help? Just a couple of weeks ago, I visited our troops in Afghanistan. While I was there, I spoke to a senior intelligence officer who told me that treating detainees harshly is actually an impediment, a roadblock, to use that officer's word, to getting intelligence from them. And here's why. He said that al-Qaeda and Taliban terrorists are taught to expect Americans to abuse them. They're recruited based on false propaganda that says that the United States is out to destroy Islam. Treating detainees harshly only reinforces their distorted view and increases their resistance to cooperate. The abuse at Abu Ghraib was a potent recruiting tool for al-Qaeda and handed al-Qaeda a propaganda weapon that they could use to peddle their violent ideology. So how did it come about that American military personnel stripped detainees naked, put them in stress positions, used dogs to scare them, put leashes around their necks to humiliate them, hooded them, deprived them of sleep, and blasted music at them? Were these actions the result of a, quote, few bad apples acting on their own? It would be a lot easier to accept if it were, but that's not the case. The truth is that senior officials in the U.S. government sought information on aggressive techniques, twisted the law to create the appearance of their legality, and authorized their use against detainees. In the process, they damaged our ability to collect intelligence that could save lives. Today's hearing will explore how it came about that the techniques called sear resistance training techniques, which are used to teach American soldiers to resist abusive interrogations by enemies that refuse to follow the Geneva Conventions, were turned on their head and sanctioned by Department of Defense officials for use offensively against detainees. Those techniques included use of stress positions, keeping detainees naked, use of dogs, and hooding during interrogations. Some brief background on SEER, which stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape Training. The United States military has 5 SEER schools to teach certain military personnel whose missions create a high risk that they might be captured, the skills needed to survive in hostile enemy territory, evade capture, and escape should they be captured. The resistance portion of SEER training exposes students to physical and psychological pressures designed to simulate abusive conditions to which they might be subject if taken prisoner by enemies that may abuse them. The Joint Personnel Recovery Agency, JPRA, is the DoD agency that oversees SEER training. JPRA's instructor guide states that a purpose of using physical pressures in training is, quote, stress inoculation, building soldiers' immunities so that they, should they be captured and be subject to harsh treatment, be better able to resist. The techniques used in SEER resistance training can include things like stripping students of their clothing, placing them in stress positions, putting hoods over their heads, disrupting their sleep, treating them like animals, subjecting them to loud music and flashing lights, and exposing them to extreme temperatures. It can also include face and body slaps, and until recently, for some sailors who attended the Navy's SEER school, it included waterboarding, which is mock drowning. The SEER schools obviously take extreme care to avoid injuring our own soldiers. Troops are medically screened to make sure that they're fit for the SEER course. Prior to the training, each student's physical limitations are carefully documented to reduce the chance that the SEER training and the use of SEER techniques will cause injury. There are explicit limitations on the duration and intensity of physical pressures. For example, when waterboarding was permitted at the Navy SEER School, the instructor manual stated that a maximum of 2 pints of water could be used on a student who was being waterboarded, and if a cloth was used to cover a student's face, it could stay in place a maximum of 20 seconds. SEER resistance training techniques are legitimate and important training tools. They prepare our forces who might fall into the hands of an abusive enemy to survive by getting them ready for what might confront them. Strict controls are also in place during SEER resistance training to reduce the risk of psychological harm to students. Psychologists are present throughout SEER training to intervene should the need arise and to talk to students during and after the training to help them cope with associated stress. Those who play the part of interrogators in the SEER school drama are not real interrogators, nor are they qualified to be. As the Deputy Commander for the Joint Forces Command put it, quote, the expertise of JPRA lies in training personnel how to respond and resist interrogations, not in how to conduct interrogations. Now that is a fundamental, important distinction. Some might say that if our personnel go through it in SEER school, what's wrong with doing it to detainees? Well, our personnel are students, and they can call off the training at any time.